Mini Museum deals with this question of anti-memorial. So it's the memorials that come before the catastrophe. Traditionally, memorials are built after the catastrophe to commemorate the catastrophe and to remind us that we should try to avoid committing such catastrophes again. You know, wars continue to occur, and so there's this question, and a lot of artists have been interested in this question, is why do we bother building memorials if it obviously doesn't really make a difference since we continue to go to war? This idea comes from my residency in Japan. I went to the museum in Hiroshima, which is a memorial. It's called a peace memorial, and it's a museum that commemorates the bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And these are very complicated stories to tell in Japan, because you can't necessarily take the position of being a victim when you yourself have perpetrated enormous amounts of crimes, war crimes. And so all this contradictory information is thrown at you, and then you have to sort of navigate your moral path or your sort of an ethical or historiographical path inside of all this material. And so once again, this got me thinking about this idea of what a memorial is. And from there, I started organizing an idea for a show which would bring together documents that I found in the Hiroshima Memorial Museum, documents that give you a sense of what the world could have been like if the bombings had occurred differently, if the bombings had not occurred, if the bombings had occurred but not on civilian populations. This is what I call a glimpse at alternative histories where the atrocity would not have been committed. And then I organized the show around two films, the Peter Watkins film, which shows a bombing that didn't actually happen, but in 1965 we had many reasons to believe could happen. And I believe that the position that Peter Watkins defends is this idea that let's show what the bombing will look like. And maybe this will help people figure out ways to not do this, to avoid it happening. And so this is a film as an ante memorial. It's a memorial before the catastrophe. At the other end of the mini museum, there's a film by a Lithuanian artist called Dimantas Narkevičius. He shows the opposite moment of the Peter Watkins film. His film shows a Soviet officer from the Red Army, based in Lithuania, operating the launching sequence for a nuclear missile strike. So on the one hand, we have Narkevičius showing us what the launching of the missiles could have looked like from the Soviet side, and on the other hand, we have Peter Watkins showing us what these missiles would have done had they arrived in England. And in between these two projections in the mini museum, there's three things. There's a document from Hiroshima Museum, which is actually a film that was the second plane on the mission to bomb Nagasaki. And the planes were supposed to go to Kokura. One of them was supposed to drop the bomb, and the other plane was supposed to film and record scientific measurements to understand the effects of the bombing. This is the footage of the instant that could have been the destruction of one city. And the good news is that did not happen, and the bad news is that means that another city was destroyed. So it's this sort of moment where history is held in the balance between two very fragile moments of coincidence. The second document that I'm showing is a memorandum, a 16-page memorandum written by scientists from the Manhattan Project. And so what they encouraged the Secretary of War to do is to drop the bomb on an unpopulated desert island, to invite people to witness this explosion and essentially tell the world, this is what we can do. We will not do it, and we would like to create an international organization to control nuclear development. And so it's this glimpse at an alternative history, which is the history of what would have happened if America had not dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and instead had shown the possibility and then organized a nuclear non-proliferation system and put it in place immediately. The whole Cold War would have been different. Everything would have been different. I liked the idea that these two documents are showing alternative histories. They are like glimpses of fiction inside of a historical world. And the last piece in the mini museum is a piece by a French fluxus artist called Robert Filiou. It's called Commémore, which means the Commission for the Mixed Exchange of War Memorials. And what Filiou proposes is that instead of going to war, countries should simply exchange their war memorials. And essentially the point he's making is that it's going to end this way anyway. We're just going to build memorials. So let's just skip the phase where we go to war and we just exchange the memorials. The mini museum deals with a couple different things. One of them is this idea of the memorial and the memorial that would happen before the catastrophe. But then there's a whole other way to read all these works, which is that these are all works of what we could call factographers, people who falsify history, at least for the artists, not for the documents. But what the museum shows is all forms of falsification. Watkins' film is a falsification, and Narkevičius' film is a false documentary. And Filiu's collages are false exchanges. So the idea is to juxtapose these false documents with real documents. The film from Hiroshima, or from Nagasaki, and the memorandum to the Secretary of War. These are real documents, but these are real documents that point towards a fictional notion of the future, which did not occur. And so the idea is just to present documents as fictions and to present fictions as documents. And what that does is it creates a very different understanding of our relative understanding of truths, of historical truths. And putting the notion of truth in crisis in this manner allows us to understand the nature of documents differently. One of the ways I understand this is that we can present documents in a way that they look like fictions, and we can present fictions in a way that they function like documents. What is interesting is the space in between, and that's a space to rethink our history. And that's what this mini memorial museum does. It rethinks our history relative to the catastrophe, and it proposes that the memorial happened before, which is in and of itself a fiction, but it's a fiction that helps us think about the very nature of memorials, and therefore it gets us to think about the very nature of the catastrophes that we're commemorating in these memorials.